if you're a college football coach, you spend a lot of time in a lot of different living rooms, and you never really know what to expect, and they don't always go great. But I talked to a bunch of coaches and just asked them, what were the nightmare in-home visits that didn't quite go like you thought they'd go? And we got a collection of some incredible stories that you don't really hear very often from inside the living room on the recruiting trail. I can't tell you how many times I put my finger down my throat. We came up with this idea sort of as a group effort. I think a couple editors were kicking around the idea, and then we kind of ran with it and sort of just knew that if we talked to enough coaches, we would get some great stories, because you kind of hear whispers of things and you hear about the food and all the uncomfortable run-ins. But even I probably underestimated just how unpredictable and how crazy it can get. I'm a cowboy, and I'm not talking about a Dallas cowboy. I think the toughest part about reporting on this story is just finding a lot of coaches that trusted you enough to tell you stories. You know, recruiting is so important in college football, and nobody wants to tell stories about them being bad at recruiting, which is a good chunk of some of these stories of just sort of putting your foot in your mouth or walking into an uncomfortable situation. So a lot of that is just, running into coaches in various times. And for a couple months, anytime I talk to a coach, I'd be like, hey, I'm working on this thing about these recruiting visits, and, we're not attaching any coaches' names to it, but do you have any incredible stories of in-home visits that don't quite go as you expected? And boy, they did. He brings in 2 pit bulls, and these were the biggest dogs I've ever seen. This was like the Shaquille O'Neal of pit bulls. I think my favorite story that got left on the cutting room floor was probably more of the food tales. There's people eating raccoon stew. There's people sitting down at a table with squirrel kebabs. There is food that was so unbelievably spicy that he just could barely eat it and had to scoop off a bunch of it onto his assistant coach's plate to make him eat it because he had to do a lot of the talking. And it's hard to talk when you're coughing consistently. And then there's just, a collection of tales of just, man, Mama doesn't know how to cook, and you cannot make that clear. I literally thought guns would be drawn. Coaches like talking about this stuff. It's fun. I told them, hey, what are the stories that when you get together and you grab a beer with your coach friends and you're talking about life on the recruiting trail, what are the stories that you're telling? I mean, that usually kind of narrows it down. It's like, oh, that story. We got to tell that story. And those are the ones that we wanted to print and bring to our readers that they haven't had a chance to hear before, and now you do.